on May 2nd, 1945, at a newly liberated Nazi prisoner of war camp in Bavaria, Germany. An American army photographer captured what appeared to be a photograph of pure triumph. A liberated American soldier, thin but smiling, surrounded by celebrating fellow prisoners, raising his arms in victory as U.S. tanks rolled through the camp gates. The man, Private First Class Thomas "Tommy" Sullivan, age 23, from Boston, had survived 14 months of brutal captivity. He was free. He was going home. The photograph was published in Life magazine on May 21, 1945, titled "Victory and Liberation: American POW Celebrates Freedom." For decades, this photograph symbolized the joy of liberation and the resilience of American prisoners of war. But in 2018, when Sullivan's granddaughter discovered letters, medical records, and family testimonies that had been hidden for 70 years, she learned a devastating truth. The smiling soldier in the victory photograph would spend the next 38 years trapped in a different kind of prison, one he could never escape. And the war that ended in May 1945 for everyone else would continue inside Tommy Sullivan's mind until the day he died. Subscribe now, because this photograph shows the moment Tommy Sullivan was freed from a POW camp. But freedom and peace are not the same thing, and what happened after liberation will haunt you. The photograph appeared on page 27 of Life magazine's May 21st, 1945 issue, part of a photo essay documenting the liberation of Nazi POW camps across Germany. Shot by Army photographer Staff Sergeant Robert Mitchell, the image captured the moment American forces liberated Oflag Ortonth near Hammelburg, Bavaria, on May 2nd, 1945. The composition was powerful and iconic. In the foreground, a thin young man in ragged prisoner clothing stood with his arms raised triumphantly above his head, mouth open in what appeared to be a shout of joy or celebration. His face was gaunt, his body visibly emaciated, his clothing torn and filthy, but his expression radiated pure elation. Behind him, dozens of other prisoners crowded together, some crying, some laughing, some embracing. In the background, American Sherman tanks and jeeps filled the camp, and U.S. soldiers distributed food and water. The caption read, "Victory and Liberation. American POW celebrates freedom. An unidentified American prisoner of war celebrates as U.S. Third Army forces liberate Oflag TNPB camp in Bavaria, May 2nd, 1945. After months or years of brutal captivity, American servicemen experienced the joy of freedom." The photograph became one of the most widely reproduced images of POW liberation from World War II. It appeared in newspapers, history textbooks, museum exhibits, and documentaries. The smiling, celebrating prisoner, with his arms raised, became a symbol of survival, resilience, and the American spirit's refusal to be broken even under the most terrible conditions. But the soldier's identity remained unknown for decades. Life magazine had captioned him as unidentified. And in the chaos of liberation, with tens of thousands of prisoners being processed, evacuated, and repatriated simultaneously, his name was never recorded with the photograph. He was just one of thousands of anonymous survivors, his individual story lost in the massive scale of the European war's end. In 2018, Jennifer Sullivan, a 34-year-old high school history teacher in Boston, was going through boxes of family documents and photographs left to her after her grandmother's death. Jennifer's grandfather, Thomas Sullivan, had died in 1983 when Jennifer was an infant, and she had grown up hearing very little about him beyond vague references to his service in World War II and acknowledgments that he had struggled afterward and had problems. Among the documents Jennifer found was a yellowed, torn page from the May 21st, 1945 Life magazine. The page containing the Liberation photograph. Written in faded pencil on the margin in her grandmother's handwriting was, "This is Tommy, May 2nd, 1945, the day they freed him, the day everything changed." Jennifer stared at the photograph. She had never seen any pictures of her grandfather as a young man. But comparing the face in the 1945 photograph to later photos she had seen of Tommy Sullivan in his 40s and 50s, she recognized him with certainty. The bone structure, the ears, the distinctive shape of his jaw, it was unmistakably her grandfather. Jennifer began researching immediately. She contacted the National Archives, the National World War II Museum, and military historians. She provided the Life magazine page and family photographs for comparison. Within weeks, facial recognition analysis and military records confirmed what Jennifer had suspected. The anonymous celebrating prisoner in one of World War II's most iconic liberation photographs was her grandfather, Private First Class Thomas Patrick Sullivan. But as Jennifer continued her research, reading through her grandfather's military files, medical records, VA correspondence, and family letters her grandmother had kept hidden, she discovered something that transformed her understanding of the photograph entirely. The celebrating soldier, with his arms raised in triumph, was about to begin a 38-year battle, far more devastating than the war he had just survived. Thomas Patrick Sullivan was born on March 17, 1922, St. Patrick's Day, in the Irish Catholic neighborhood of South Boston. He was the youngest of 5 children born to Patrick and Mary Sullivan. His father was a dock worker. His mother took in laundry. The family was poor but tight-knit, deeply religious, and proud of their Irish heritage. Tommy grew up playing stickball in the streets, attending Mass every Sunday at Gate of Heaven Church, and working odd jobs from age 12 to help support his family during the Depression. He attended South Boston High School, where he was known as friendly, funny, and fiercely loyal to his friends and family. He wasn't a great student, but he was popular, always ready with a joke, always willing to help someone in need, always the one who could make people laugh, even during hard times. Tommy graduated in 1940 and got a job working alongside his father on the docks. The work was hard and the pay was modest, but Tommy was happy. He was dating a girl named Catherine O'Brien, also from Southie, whom he'd known since childhood. They talked about getting married once Tommy saved enough money. After Pearl Harbor, Tommy enlisted in the U.S. Army in January 1942. He was 19 years old. He told Catherine, "All the guys are going. I can't stay home while they're over there fighting. I'll be back before you know it, and then we'll get married and have a bunch of kids." Catherine gave Tommy a small silver crucifix on a chain. "My grandmother gave this to me," she said. "Keep it with you. It'll keep you safe and bring you home." Tommy completed basic training and was assigned to the 106th Infantry Division. He shipped overseas to England in October 1944 and arrived in France in November as a replacement in the massive American buildup, preparing for the final push into Germany. Tommy's letters home during late 1944 were optimistic. He wrote about the French countryside, the camaraderie with his fellow soldiers, his confidence that the war would be over by Christmas. In a letter dated November 30th, 1944, Tommy wrote to his mother, "Dear Ma, don't worry about me. The Germans are beaten and they know it. We're pushing them back every day. I'll be home by spring at the latest. Tell Pa and the boys I'm doing fine. Tell Katie I think about her every day. I love you all. Your son, Tommy." 3 weeks later, on December 16th, 1944, Germany launched a massive surprise counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg. The Battle of the Bulge. the largest and bloodiest battle American forces would fight in World War II. Tommy's division, the 106th, was positioned directly in the path of the German attack. The division had only arrived at the front lines days earlier. Many soldiers, including Tommy, had never experienced combat. They were green troops facing Germany's most elite remaining units in a desperate all-or-nothing offensive. The 106th Infantry Division was overwhelmed. Within 3 days of the German attack, over 8,000 American soldiers from the division were surrounded and captured, one of the largest mass surrenders of American forces in U.S. military history. On December 19, 1944, after 3 days of chaotic combat, ammunition exhausted, supplies cut off, and surrounded by German forces, Private First Class Tommy Sullivan and hundreds of his fellow soldiers surrendered. Tommy was 22 years old. He had been in combat for exactly 4 days. He would spend the next 134 days as a German prisoner of war. And those 134 days would destroy him more completely than any bullet ever could. Tommy Sullivan's experience as a prisoner of war from December 1944 through May 1945 represented the worst period for American POWs in German captivity during World War II. Earlier in the war, while conditions in German POW camps were harsh, they generally adhered to Geneva Convention standards for American and British prisoners. But by winter 1944 to 1945, Germany was collapsing. Supply lines were cut, food was scarce, infrastructure was destroyed, and the treatment of prisoners deteriorated catastrophically. Tommy and thousands of other American prisoners, captured during the Battle of the Bulge, were forced to march for weeks through freezing winter conditions with minimal food, water, or shelter, later known as the death marches. Men died from exposure, starvation, and exhaustion. German guards shot anyone who fell behind or couldn't keep up. Tommy later estimated that perhaps 30% of the prisoners who began the march didn't survive it. Tommy was eventually sent to Oflag 13B, a POW camp near Hammelburg, Bavaria. By early 1945, the camp held over 5,000 prisoners in facilities designed for perhaps 1,500. Overcrowding was catastrophic. Disease, dysentery, typhus, pneumonia spread unchecked. Medical care was non-existent. Food rations were cut repeatedly as German supply lines collapsed. By March 1945, prisoners were receiving perhaps 500 to 700 calories per day. Starvation rations. Tommy lost over 60 pounds during his captivity. He watched fellow prisoners die daily from starvation, disease, and untreated wounds. The physical suffering was terrible, but what proved even more damaging was what Tommy witnessed and experienced that he would never be able to forget or escape. Years later, in therapy sessions and in rare conversations with family, Tommy described incidents that haunted him for the rest of his life. He held a dying 18-year-old kid from Nebraska, just a boy, really, as the kid died slowly from dysentery over 3 days, crying for his mother. Tommy couldn't save him, couldn't ease his suffering, could only hold his hand while he died. He watched German guards beat an American prisoner to death for stealing a piece of bread. The beating lasted 10 minutes. Tommy stood paralyzed, unable to intervene, hating himself for his cowardice but knowing that any attempt to help would have meant his own death. He was forced by guards to help bury the dead, dragging emaciated corpses of men who had been his friends, men he'd served with, men who had survived the Battle of the Bulge only to die of starvation and disease in captivity. Tommy dug mass graves and piled bodies like cordwood while guards watched impassively. Most devastating of all, Tommy watched as some prisoners, men who had survived combat and months of captivity, simply gave up in the final weeks. They stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped caring whether they lived or died. They would sit in the barracks, staring at nothing, and within days, they would be dead. Tommy tried desperately to keep their spirits up, but some were beyond reach. He watched the life drain out of them and couldn't stop it. Tommy later told a VA psychiatrist, "The worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold or the beatings. The worst part was watching men die and being completely helpless to save them. Watching boys, just kids, 18, 19 years old, die crying for their mothers while I held them and lied and told them they'd be okay. And the worst part was that I survived and they didn't. Why did I make it when they didn't? What made me special? What made me deserve to live when they deserved it just as much?" The survivor's guilt, the psychiatrist noted, was profound and likely permanent. On May 2, 1945, the U.S. Third Army's 14th Armored Division liberated Oflag 13B. For the prisoners who had survived 134 days of hell, liberation was an overwhelming explosion of emotion. Joy, relief, disbelief, grief for those who hadn't made it, and the sudden realization that they had actually survived. When American tanks rolled through the gates, Tommy Sullivan was standing near the front of the crowd of prisoners who rushed forward. The moment was captured by Army photographer Robert Mitchell. Tommy, with his arms raised, mouth open in a shout, surrounded by celebrating prisoners, American tanks visible in the background. In that frozen moment, Tommy appeared to be celebrating with pure joy. And to some extent, he was. The immediate relief of survival, of freedom, of knowing the suffering was over. But Tommy would later describe that moment very differently. "I wasn't celebrating," Tommy told his wife Catherine decades later, during one of his rare moments of openness about his experiences. "I was screaming. I was screaming because I couldn't believe it was real. I was screaming because I had survived and so many others hadn't. I was screaming because I was looking at those American soldiers, healthy, well-fed, clean, and I realized how far I'd fallen, how much I'd lost. The photographer thought I was celebrating, but I was screaming in grief and guilt and horror at what I'd become." The photograph captured what appeared to be triumph, but it actually captured the beginning of Tommy's disintegration. Following liberation, Tommy and other survivors were evacuated to field hospitals, then to recovery facilities in France and England. Tommy underwent weeks of medical treatment for malnutrition, disease, and the physical effects of captivity. He gained back some weight. His physical wounds healed. He was given new uniforms. Superficially, he began to resemble a normal, healthy young man again. But Tommy wasn't healing. He wasn't sleeping. When he did sleep, he had nightmares, reliving the death marches, watching his friends die, digging graves, feeling the crushing guilt of surviving when others hadn't. He couldn't eat normally. Food made him nauseous. He startled violently at sudden noises. He couldn't tolerate being in crowded spaces. He broke down crying without warning. Military doctors diagnosed him with combat exhaustion and temporary nervous condition, the terms used in 1945 for what would later be recognized as severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. They assured him it would pass with time and rest. They were catastrophically wrong. In July 1945, Tommy was deemed physically recovered and given orders to return to the United States. He sailed home on a troop ship with thousands of other returning servicemen. On July 23, 1945, the ship arrived in Boston Harbor. Tommy's family was waiting at the dock. His parents, his brothers, his sisters, and Catherine, the girl he'd been planning to marry since before the war. They saw a thin but seemingly healthy young man in a clean army uniform. They saw their Tommy home safe. They saw survival and victory. They didn't see the nightmares. They didn't see the guilt. They didn't see the invisible wounds that would never heal. They didn't see that the smiling young man who had left Boston in 1942 had died in a German POW camp. And what came home was a shattered remnant who no longer knew how to live in a world without horror. Tommy Sullivan was home, but he would never truly leave that camp. And the war that ended in May 1945 for everyone else would continue inside Tommy's mind for another 38 years. Tommy Sullivan was discharged from the U.S. Army in August 1945 with an honorable discharge, a Purple Heart, the Prisoner of War Medal, and a 10% disability rating for service-connected nervous condition. He married Catherine O'Brien in September 1945, just 6 weeks after his discharge. The wedding was small, immediate family only. Catherine later told her daughter that Tommy had insisted on keeping it small because he couldn't handle crowds and needed it to be quiet. Tommy got a job working construction. He couldn't go back to the docks because the noise and chaos triggered panic attacks. He and Catherine rented a small apartment in South Boston. To outside observers, Tommy appeared to be adjusting to civilian life reasonably well. He was working, he was married, he seemed functional. But Catherine knew the truth. Tommy wasn't sleeping more than 2 to 3 hours a night. He had violent nightmares multiple times per week, often waking up screaming or thrashing. He couldn't eat normally. Certain foods, especially anything involving bread or soup, reminded him of prison camp and made him violently ill. He avoided crowds, social gatherings, church services. He stopped seeing his friends from before the war. He became increasingly isolated. Most troubling, Tommy started drinking. At first, it was just a beer or two after work to settle his nerves. By 1947, he was drinking heavily every night. By 1950, he was drinking throughout the day. Alcohol was the only thing that quieted the nightmares, dulled the memories, stopped the constant replaying of the worst moments in his mind. Tommy and Catherine had 3 children, born in 1946, 1948, and 1951. Catherine raised them essentially as a single mother. Tommy was physically present, but emotionally absent. He worked when he could, but he lost job after job due to drinking, missed days, and violent outbursts when triggered by seemingly random things, loud noises, crowded spaces, certain smells. Tommy's children grew up afraid of their father. Not because he was violent toward them, he never hit Catherine or the kids, but because he was unpredictable, frightening when drunk, prone to sudden rages or breakdowns. He would lock himself in the bedroom for days. He would disappear for weekends on drinking binges. He couldn't attend school events, family gatherings, or celebrations because crowds triggered panic attacks. The children learned not to make sudden noises around Dad, not to ask about the war, not to expect him to be like other fathers. They learned to tiptoe around the broken man in their house and to never, ever, under any circumstances, wake him suddenly from sleep. Catherine tried desperately to get Tommy help. She took him to VA doctors dozens of times, but in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, treatment for PTSD was primitive or non-existent. Doctors prescribed sleeping pills, tranquilizers, and told him to stop dwelling on the past and pull himself together. The VA denied his requests for increased disability benefits, stating his nervous condition wasn't severe enough to warrant higher ratings. Tommy made multiple attempts to hold jobs, construction, factory work, janitorial positions, but couldn't maintain employment. The family survived on Catherine's wages as a seamstress and occasional VA disability payments. They were constantly on the edge of poverty. By the 1960s, Tommy was drinking a fifth of whiskey daily. His health deteriorated. He developed liver disease, heart problems, and chronic respiratory issues. His mental state worsened. The nightmares never stopped. The guilt never eased. The war never ended. Tommy Sullivan, the smiling liberated prisoner from the 1945 photograph, spent 38 years trapped in a different kind of prison, one inside his own mind, one with no liberation, no rescue, no escape. Thomas Sullivan died on November 11, 1983, Veterans Day, at age 61 from complications of liver cirrhosis, heart disease, and what his death certificate listed as chronic alcoholism. He died at home in South Boston, in the same small apartment where he had lived for 38 years with Catherine. At his funeral, attended by family and a few elderly neighbors, no one spoke about his war service except to say he had been a veteran and had served his country. The Life magazine photograph of his liberation wasn't mentioned. His children barely knew it existed. Catherine lived another 35 years after Tommy's death, dying in 2018 at age 93. Before her death, she gave her granddaughter Jennifer boxes of documents she had kept hidden for decades. Documents she said Jennifer should have to understand what really happened to Grandpa Tommy. The boxes contained VA medical records, 1945 to 1983. Documenting 38 years of psychiatric treatment, hospitalizations for alcoholism, suicide attempts, 3 documented, likely more unreported, diagnoses of severe PTSD, depression, survivor's guilt, chronic insomnia, and repeated denials of benefits, increases despite clear evidence of total disability. Letters Tommy wrote but never sent. Dozens of letters addressed to men who had died in the POW camp, explaining why he survived and they didn't, apologizing for not saving them, asking for their forgiveness. Letters written over decades, never mailed because the recipients were dead. Catherine's diary. Entries spanning 1945 to 1983, documenting Tommy's deterioration, her desperate attempts to help him, her grief at watching the man she loved be destroyed by wounds no one could see. An entry from 1972 read, "Tommy said today he should have died in that camp with the others. He said he's been dead for 30 years anyway, just didn't have the courage to lie down. I don't know how to help him anymore. I don't think anyone can." The Life magazine page. The May 21st, 1945 photograph with Catherine's notation. "This is Tommy, May 2nd, 1945. The day they freed him. The day everything changed." Jennifer researched obsessively. She confirmed Tommy's identity in the photograph. She obtained his complete military and medical records through Freedom of Information requests. She interviewed elderly relatives who remembered Tommy before and after the war. She consulted with PTSD specialists and military historians. The picture that emerged was devastating. Tommy Sullivan had come home from World War II with severe, untreated PTSD that modern treatment might have significantly helped. Instead, he received inadequate care, was told to get over it, was denied appropriate disability benefits, and self-medicated with alcohol for 38 years while his mind replayed the horrors of captivity every single day. In 2019, Jennifer published an article in a military history journal titled "The Liberation That Wasn't: The Invisible Prison of PTSD and the True Cost of War." She included the 1945 photograph with a new caption, "Private First Class Thomas Sullivan, 1945, age 23, moments after liberation from German POW camp. May 2nd, 1945. Sullivan survived 134 days of captivity, but would spend the next 38 years trapped by trauma, survivor's guilt, and untreated PTSD. He died in 1983 at age 61. The photograph shows freedom from physical imprisonment. It does not show freedom from psychological wounds that never heal." The article went viral. Tommy's story became a focal point in discussions about veteran mental health, PTSD treatment, and the invisible wounds of war. The 1945 photograph once seen as an iconic image of triumph, became something far more complex. A reminder that survival and recovery are not the same thing, that coming home is not the same as being home, that the war doesn't end just because the shooting stops. Jennifer had the 1945 photograph enlarged and framed. She hung it in her classroom with a placard reading, "My grandfather, Thomas Sullivan." This photograph shows the day he was freed from a POW camp, but he was never freed from what he experienced there. Remember that surviving war and living after war are two different things. And remember that some wounds are invisible, but no less deadly. The smiling, celebrating soldier with his arms raised in triumph was free, but he would never know peace. And sometimes surviving is its own kind of tragedy.